property, there was grapes planted on. There was about 15 acres of grapes planted, and but the grapes were planted only on the highest, steepest hillsides, where they couldn't plant hay or mow hay, because everyone that was in agriculture didn't. Everything was horse farmed, so you naturally had a farm with horses. So it was on the back hills, and the slopes that could be raised hay, they raised hay on, and the flatter areas where they could go in and bind it, they planted wheat through the whole area, and the steam threshers would come through the valley and centrally locate, and they would send a crews in, and they would bind your wheat, and then they would take it to that central location, and they would thresh it, and it was a barter system where they would keep their part of it, and you'd take your sacks of grain home, and that's how. And then you did with what you wanted with it. You sold it or used it yourself. So, but the grapes that were planted were own rooted, and Dad said they were about 5 to 7 years old when they bought the property, and by 1905 or 1906 they pulled the last of the grapes out because phylloxera had devastated the vineyard so bad that it wasn't bad. There were some on that hill that we went on, and some behind the house here on that hill. And there were two varieties. One was white grapes and one was red, and the whites were golden shasla, was a big bunch, and the red grapes was Carignan.
So then when did you plant again? When were the next grape planted?
And then when they pulled those out, and of course at that particular time there was only one resisting rootstock for phylloxera available, and that was, which I mentioned, St. George rootstock. And it was in short demand because everyone that had grapes in those days was experiencing that phylloxera problem. So it took 2 or 3 years to get the rootstock when you decided to plant. So Dad planted in 1912, 1913, and 1914 until he had, but he did plant the hills that were marginal, and then he started planting some prune trees, so we had prunes, and we ended with about 30 acres of prunes.
Were there nurseries that you bought the rootstock from?
The original ones, the rootstock came from France in barrels, because it was that St. George rootstock. And Dad said by the time they got here, they were packed in sawdust and things, but a lot of them were dry, and that's why there was, usually it took 2, 3, or 4 years to get a vineyard to grow. And if you planted 1,000 vines, it probably took you 3 or 4 years to get 950 vines growing. You know, you'd have to replant several hundred for 2 or 3 years. Today, if you plant 1,000 vines, and if you lose more than 1 or 2, something's wrong. So
the resistant rootstock came here from France.
Yeah, as I understand, there's a big problem right now. Everyone's trying to take credit where that stuff came from, I guess. But as I understood it, back years before, that which is called St. George rootstock, but it's a native wild vine in Texas. And France experienced, and Europe, all of Europe, was devastated with phylloxera back many, many years before, because they're an older growing area where those vines have been grown for hundreds of years in Europe. And so they spent a lot of years developing that particular rootstock. And then of course they had, so it took several years for nurseries in this area to accumulate enough rootstock or enough cuttings so that they could make enough rootstock so to take care of what was being grown in the area. I think they're experiencing that some now. There's one or two rootstocks in the area. Most everyone wants to plant a specific rootstock, so they're in short demand, so you have to almost wait a year or later in the year ahead of time. Other than that, it was supply and demand.